Welcome, everyone, to the 2024-25 Speaker Series hosted by the Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics. I'm Karen Economopoulos, the director of the Forum. We would like you to know that today's webinar is being recorded so it can be posted and shared on the Forum website. We would also like you to know that we have reserved some time at the end of the session for questions. You can submit questions throughout the session via the chat box to Q&A host. Before we begin the presentation, I would like to introduce you to the Forum. The Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics is a web-based resource hosted at TURC in Cambridge, Massachusetts. TURC is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve math and science education. As part of its mission, TURC is committed to modeling how diversity, equity, and belonging can improve STEM education and research practice in order to create and support inclusive learning environments and equitable outcomes for all. The Forum grew out of a long-time TURC project, Investigations in Number, Data, and Space, a K-5 mathematics curriculum funded almost 35 years ago in part by the National Science Foundation. While the Forum is informed by our decades of work on investigations and the professional development related to it, the Forum is not curriculum specific because equitable teaching and learning applies to every classroom and every school, regardless of the adopted curriculum materials. The Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics, launched last fall, is intended to be a place for educators to reflect on and discuss equity, access, identity, and agency in the K-5 mathematics classroom. Its goal is to provide resources, publications, and professional learning opportunities to broaden and deepen perspectives and to open up discussions among educators who are pursuing equity in mathematics learning for their students. One such resource, which is guiding much of our work, is a framework for reflecting about equity in elementary mathematics classrooms. This framework identifies 4 areas for consideration when reflecting on equity in mathematics and considering action at the classroom and school level. They are deep and rigorous mathematics, equitable participation in a collaborative mathematics community, strength-based assessment and accommodation, connections to students, their families, and their communities. This year, the speaker series is organized around these 4 areas. In tonight's webinar, an introduction to 4 elements of equitable math learning communities, our Forum colleagues, Marta Garcia and Lynne Godfrey, will provide an overview of these areas, which we believe are critical to fostering and sustaining equitable teaching and learning in the elementary mathematics classroom. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Marta Garcia has been a teacher, math coach, and consultant for over 30 years. Her work with multilingual learners in a variety of contexts has inspired her to continually consider the interactions of language and mathematics. Marta facilitates a virtual coaching math professional learning community and teaches graduate courses in mathematics teacher leadership program at Mount Holyoke College. Lynne Godfrey is a longtime educator in Boston and Cambridge, Mass., where she has been a classroom teacher, math coach, and director of instruction, curriculum, and adult development for mathematics. Lynne has influenced and supported the development of new teachers as part of the Boston Teacher Residency Program and has been involved in local and national work with Bob Moses and the Algebra Project for decades. Lynne and Marta have worked closely with the Forum for Equity in Elementary Mathematics for a number of years, helping us to define the work, develop resources for teachers and students, and foster the Forum as a community specifically designed for K-5 educators. Please join me in welcoming Lynne Godfrey and Marta Garcia.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for joining us tonight. Marta and I will begin by sharing our background and the experiences that have anchored us in the work of equitable math learning communities. I was one of those Black girls who loved math until I got to college. As a math major in the early 70s at Tufts University, I got the message loud and clear from my advisor and math classes that were taught by and attended by mostly white males. This is not for you. When I first started teaching in the early 80s, I met Bob Moses when he and his wife Janet sent their children to the King Open School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was during this time, working with Bob and others to design and implement the algebra project, that my love for math was rekindled. Bob, the students, the teachers, and I created the Algebra Project Transition Curriculum, designed as an experiential and conceptual bridge between arithmetic and algebra. I have continued working with the Algebra Project for over 40 years, and with teachers in school districts nationally, and with the Teacher Preparation Program, Boston Teacher Residency. These districts and organizations have focused their work on teaching and learning practices that create equity and access to deep and rigorous mathematics for all students, especially those who have been underserved. Since beginning this work with Bob in the late 1980s, I have had the opportunity and the privilege to collaborate and learn from many of the educators and researchers you will hear from in this speaker series. Chapter 2, A Critical Review of American K-12 Mathematics Education from the Brilliance of Black Children in Mathematics, is a great way to get started learning about the history of math education and the policies that impacted the education of Black children. Young, Gifted, and Black, Promoting High Achievement Among African American Students by Teresa Perry is another text that outlines the history and movement toward more equitable teaching and learning. My commitment to this work is also personal, as a parent of 3 daughters and as a grandmother of 2 boys. And now I'll turn it over to Marta for her story.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing your story. I am the daughter of a Cuban immigrant mother and a Latino father raised in Florida. I started first grade speaking Spanish. Now, I don't recall much about my early school years other than my mom would proudly share that the teachers were surprised that I could read and reason about numbers. I now look back as that not being a compliment, but perhaps being an indication of their expectations for me. My first few years of teaching were in a middle school that served migrant students who were in and out of school and who had insecure homes. I worked with students who were not yet literate, who said they hated math and had given up on school. And often the message from the school echoed their own perspective of why bother? Later on, I taught 4th and 5th grade students who were new to our country. Many were part of the Mariel boat lift from Cuba. The push from the school was to learn English quickly and assimilate quickly. These first experiences and my later mathematics and coaching roles continued to offer me evidence that multilingual students were often not seen as able to contribute in the math classroom. Their cultural capital was ignored as the focus was on speaking English before participating in math class. But the brilliance and competence I noted in multilingual students were there, ready to be noticed and lifted up. And so many of the teachers I worked with yearned for ways to include their multilingual students. Over the years, I have been influenced by works such as those of Rochelle Gutierrez, Francis Su's work, and the work of organizations such as Toros, who focus on advocating for equity and a high-quality mathematics education for all students, in particular Latinx students. Opportunities to work on National Science Foundation projects and math and science grants that focused on inviting all voices into math classrooms, such as the one that led to the body of work that we will be sharing tonight, expanded my impact and gave me new insights. My work continues to focus on disrupting barriers that prohibit multilingual students from participating fully in math classrooms, and includes mentoring and lifting up new teachers who represent the Latinx population, so that students can see themselves represented in the classrooms in which they learn. You just heard our 2 stories, and we know that we all bring our own individual stories to our work. We also, of course, are always considering the stories of our students and how we as educators impact their developing identities. Tonight, we will think about how we can support the development of positive math stories by building an equitable math community.
Our work individually and as a forum team over the years has been informed by what happens in classrooms in rural, urban, suburban, in both small and large districts. Through collaborations with Black and Latinx students and their teachers and coaches, we have centered our work on elevating these voices to create and sustain more equitable math classrooms. Much new work and many new voices have sharpened and deepened a focus on issues of equity in mathematics and presented new challenges for our thinking. Marta and I, along with our forum colleagues, embarked on an internal study of the ways in which we could better support equity, identity, and agency in elementary learning communities. We engaged in reading and discussion in order to interrogate our own work, asking ourselves and others this central question. How do we establish and support equitable mathematics learning communities in which students, especially those who have been historically underserved, develop positive identities and agencies, make sense of mathematics, and know that their ideas are important and their voices are heard?
So let's begin by thinking about the role of students and teachers in an equitable math community. Jot down or think for yourself one thing you would expect to see a student doing and one example of what a teacher might be doing in an equitable math learning community. So hopefully you've got a couple of things to hold on to. Let's share together. In an equitable math learning community, we need to first make sure that our classrooms are places where making sense of mathematics is at the center of the work for each and every student and for their teachers. So we're going to share some examples and see what connections you can make with the responses that you thought of. In an equitable math learning community, each student engages in important mathematics deeply over time. They make sense of mathematics and expect mathematics to make sense to them. They communicate their thinking and they strive to understand the thinking of others. And they see themselves as powerful doers of mathematics. At the same time, teachers are welcoming students' identities into the classroom. They're attending to each student's mathematical thinking and giving each student space to make sense. They're ensuring that students have opportunities to contribute and to participate. And teachers are engaging in ongoing learning for themselves about the math that they teach and reflecting on how they teach that math. So we can consider now how each of the teacher actions that we just shared, or the ones that you thought of, can impact the ways in which students are engaging in math class. This quote from our framework focuses on the importance of having someone recognize and appreciate one's knowledge and ability, and how that supports a positive math identity. When we develop a stance that all students come in with competencies and ideas, we know that we're taking a critical first step in developing an equitable math classroom. So, as we heard earlier, this framework includes 4 categories to guide equitable math education. We're going to begin by considering the first category of the framework, deep and rigorous mathematics. As we unpack this category, jot down some questions and ideas that come up for you. And you can be thinking about your role in supporting the components of this category. Here are some points that illustrate what we mean when we say deep and rigorous mathematics. Equitable teaching and learning of mathematics can only proceed in an environment where students are engaging deeply with significant math ideas, where they are developing conceptual understanding of those ideas, where they are participating in mathematics activities that have high cognitive demand, and where they are experiencing the joy and the beauty of mathematics. In addition to thinking about what engaging in a deep and rigorous mathematics community means, let's now think about what it would look like and what it would sound like. And we're going to do that by visiting a few classrooms by watching a short video. As you watch this video, keep in mind these questions. How is the math deep and rigorous? What do you notice about the teacher's role in supporting students' math understanding? And do you see evidence of powerful math thinking, of student agency, and of joy? As you watch this video, you will see that it features different students, different teachers, and ranges over grade levels. Keep in mind the questions we just shared. Jot down some examples that you note related to the questions we just posed.
Ebony, can you come show us one of your equations? Okay. I see a lot of agree signs. Would anyone else care to show us where is this 16 times 2? We all agree that there are 32 dots? Yes. Okay, but where is 16 times 2? Ebony, your friends think they can explain where you got it.
She got 16 times 2 because there's 8 in each group, so put these two groups together.
24.
How do you know it's 24?
Because I said 10 plus 10, that's 20. Then 12 is 2 more, so 2 and 2 is 4. Then and 20 and 4.
How are you thinking about that?
Because if 1 is equal to 4 fourths, no, 3 thirds,
3 thirds.
and then 2 is equal to 8 thirds.
How did you get to
6 thirds.
6 thirds? How did you get to 6 thirds?
Because I was thinking about fourths for a second.
So how did you then figure out that it was 6 thirds?
1/3 here because I know that it's more than 1/4 because the denominator is smaller, and since the denominator is smaller, the pieces are going to be bigger. And it's less than a half, and since 2 thirds is already more than a half, 1/3 is going to be less.
Okay. How much less?
1/3.
1/3. How much less than a half is 1/3?
Did anyone do this a different way? A totally different way? Kumba.
I did it on a number line.
In your head?
Yes.
A mental number line? I like it. Let's do it. Let's erase some of this. Okay, show me all of what you did.
You said subtraction. I'm going to do 100 minus 56 to get my answer.
Subtraction. Where did you get the 100 from?
Since the problem is 56 plus I don't know equals 100, I think I could do it backwards.
So I just want to start by giving a shout out to all the teachers and students who let us into their classrooms for our learning together. And so this category that Marta described, deep and rigorous mathematics, when we look at the montage of clips from the 5 classrooms, we can see evidence of students' powerful math thinking as they engaged in deep and rigorous math. In making sense of which fraction is larger, one student called on what he knows when comparing denominators. He said, because I know that it's smaller than 1/4, and since the denominator is smaller, the pieces are going to be bigger. In the montage, we also saw students making connections between each other's ideas, making use of representation to explain their thinking, and pursuing an idea to uncover underlying structures. In the montage, we also saw deep and rigorous mathematics when we see teachers supporting students' math understanding and agency. By offering students opportunities to rephrase and add on to the thinking of others, by posing questions like, how did you think about that? Or how do you know it is 24? By asking this question, the teacher extends the wait time for the student to respond, and the student confidently explained her strategy for decomposing and adding the partial sums together to get the total 24. She said, because I said 10 plus 10 is 20, then 12 is 2 more, so 2 plus 2 is 4, then 20 and 4. The teacher also shows curiosity and respect for the student's ideas, and the teacher supports the student's agency when the teacher asked, in your head, a mental number line? Let's do it.
You also may have noted ways in which students were exhibiting their agency and their joy. We could see that they felt confident changing their responses, using mistakes to further their understanding, and they used rough draft thinking, pausing and revising. We also saw that students' ideas were honored as they saw their peers and teachers responding to and taking on their ideas. And we saw students take ownership of the classroom space, coming to the front of the room, using post-it ideas to extend their thinking, and adding on to the ideas of others, as well as posing questions. In addition to these points, we can also acknowledge how their nonverbal communication, such as facial expressions, body language, and gestures, demonstrated joy and agency, both in the contributions they made to their class and in their interactions with their teachers, as well as their engagement with the mathematics. As you viewed this collection of classroom episodes, you might now consider how the components of this category are present in your own work. You may be left thinking about ways in which you can deepen the mathematical experiences of your students. What are some questions that you're left with? What are some current teaching practices that you would like to reflect on in terms of the impact on creating classrooms in which students are thinking deeply and joyfully about mathematics? The authors of The Impact of Identity say that developing deep understanding of mathematics is a major goal of equity-based mathematics teaching practices, and that it includes conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, problem solving, and reasoning. And we agree with this statement. We believe that deep and rigorous mathematics is the foundation of an equitable math classroom. Without engaging students in significant mathematical thinking, there really can't be equitable learning. We can continue to think about this category of our framework during our second session in this series. We're so super excited to have Susan Jo Russell and Deborah Shifter join us for our second session in the speaker series. Their session is titled Interweaving Deep Mathematics and Equitable Participation. So be sure to mark your calendars for December the 12th.
On to our next category, equitable participation in a collaborative mathematics community. We believe this means that all students are invited to express their ideas, to revise and build on them, to have others respectfully listen to and engage with their ideas, and to be seen as mathematical thinkers who make meaningful contributions to classroom conversations. This category of the framework builds on the idea that all students come to the classroom knowing and understanding some aspects of mathematics. Math discussions can be a place where we get to hear and understand students' thinking, make connections, and strengthen math identities. But we don't often get to reflect on what happened during a math discussion. The forum worked with groups of teachers and coaches to explore these questions from the framework and to reflect on practices that support equitable participation. The questions focused on determining how we can know students and their interests, how we can build and sustain an equitable learning community throughout the year, and how students view themselves and each other as contributors to the math discourse, and how we can collect and use evidence-based data to reflect on students' voices, the kinds of questions and opportunities offered to which students, and how we position all students as doers of mathematics. To support equitable participation in our math classrooms, we might present students with this prompt. I wish my teacher knew that during math class, So I'm inviting you to put yourself back in your elementary school self. Pause for a second and just think about what's something that you wish your teacher knew about you. By asking questions or using prompts such as, I wish my teachers knew during math class that this allows us to better understand how our students are experiencing math. Some of the comments we got back from students when they were posed with this question were, I don't really know the words that she is saying, or I use 100% of my brain to understand. I solve problems in a different way. And one that really struck us, I might look like I know, but I might need help. Consider how collecting this information from students might support a teacher in making the classroom a more equitable community. When we have feedback and input from students, we can then respond to what we learn by making shifts in our practice or offering additional opportunities for students to share their experiences. And as teachers consider reflection, by collecting evidence and reflecting on instructional practices and decisions, teachers can learn about the impact their decisions have and can then take action to create more equitable learning communities throughout the year by engaging in cycles of reflection. Here is an example of one teacher's reflection on the kinds of questions posed to students. This teacher is considering what the evidence might reveal about which students get which kinds of questions. This teacher said, I feel like I keep track of who participates and I try to make sure everyone is participating in some way. But I never really thought to keep track of who's getting those questions that promote higher order thinking and who's getting a question that is basically rephrasing or restating what a partner said. I think if I did keep track, I don't think it would be as equitable as I think. An important part of building that community is knowing our students. This quote is from a blog that was posted on our forum. An equitable learning community requires first and foremost knowing who our students are and using that knowledge to situate math learning in the lived experiences of students, building on the knowledge and skills each student brings to school and acknowledging and welcoming students' ideas and identities into the classroom. No student should be asked to leave any part of who they are at the door. To continue exploring equitable participation, we hope that you'll join us on March 6th. It's a Thursday evening for a session with Dr. Elham Kazemi. It's titled Developing Equitable Participation Through Reciprocity and Relationships. Now I'm going to turn it back to Marta.
The next category of our framework embraces the idea that all students come to the classroom knowing and understanding some aspects of mathematics. Work with students begins with what they know and understand and what makes sense to them with what they are already able to do. When we have someone recognize and appreciate our knowledge and our ability as a math thinker, this develops and builds our identity. And it is from this place of strength that we can most effectively work with our students. So as we look at the aspects of this category, we encourage you to be thinking about what connections you see to your own practice and what new action steps you might take on. A strength-based approach to assessing what students know and understand is a critical component of an equitable learning community. Strength-based assessment begins with what a student knows and understands, what they make sense of, and what the student is able to do. It is informed by the math focus of the task and the trajectory of the math ideas. And it provides us with information that informs decisions about the next step that we will take so that we can move the students' thinking forward. As we did with the first two categories, let's take a look at another example from the classroom. The two pieces of student work we're going to look at next are from students who solved this problem. So take a few seconds and think about how you would solve this problem. Jot down your ideas, and then we'll come back together and look at some student work. All right, hopefully you've got a few ideas down. Using strength-based assessment means looking carefully at a student's thinking and then determining what the student understands. So let's take a look at what Henry has done. First, we will describe what we see without making any inferences. We can say that on Henry's paper, we see numbers, we see 4 addition equations. He has a question mark after 48 plus 34. And he has created a representation that has numbers and some lines and some squares. Next, we can consider what Henry appears to understand. Based on this piece of his work, what are some aspects of addition and the base 10 number system that you think Henry understands? We might say that his representation seems to show that he can decompose 2-digit numbers. We might infer that he's showing 4 10s and 3 10s and 8 1s and 4 1s with his sticks, his little lines and squares. And perhaps this is his way of showing 10s and 1s. Now he seems to know to combine like place value units because he combines the 4 and the 3 and the 8 and the 4. And he also seems to know to combine those two partial sums. We can see that he's outlined the 7 and the 12, and that then he writes 7 plus 12 equals 19. So there's a lot that Henry's showing about his understanding. Now, if we think about what Henry may not yet understand, we might wonder if he understands that the 4 and the 3 represent 4 10s and 3 10s, or 40 and 30. So next we can think about how might we move Henry's ideas forward? How can we use his strengths to nudge his understanding? We might do that by asking him about his representation. Henry, what do those 4 sticks and lines represent? Where do you see that amount in your equations? Or we could ask him what the sum of 19 represents. Where does he see that in his work? Our careful strength-based analysis of Henry's work just now is an example of how we can shift from deficit-based evaluations of students' ideas to an asset-based perspective. Now here we see Anita's work on the same problem, and we can use those same 4 questions to analyze her work with a focus on what Anita understands. First, we can state what we see in the work, then we can unpack what understanding is present, and then we situate the student's ideas as valuable. We position Anita as capable of making sense of a problem. When we do that for students, we can then focus on next steps, such as posing clarifying questions to better understand students' ideas. When students are viewed as capable and competent, When we focus on their strengths, we are better able to support their development as math thinkers. So this next quote reminds us that the information that we get from strength-based assessment is what enables teachers to support the range of learners in the classroom. And in that way, we can provide responsive accommodations that are truly helpful, not overly helpful, but truly helpful. And those accommodations can help students engage deeply with the mathematics. We hope you can see the connection between this category and our first category, deep and rigorous math. As you reflect on the components of an equitable classroom environment, you can begin to think about questions like this. How can I collaborate with colleagues to analyze student work? What are some ways I can use an asset-based approach to respond to students' learning needs? Now, to continue the work of this category, we have a speaker coming, Rachel Lambert, on April the 8th. Her session, Trusting All Students as Sense Makers, will help us continue thinking about strength-based assessment and accommodations. All right, Lynn, here's our final and fourth category.
Thank you, Marta. So this next category of the framework is not the least. It's a pretty exciting category, connections to students, their families, and communities. It's what situates math learning and students' lived experiences. It builds on the knowledge and skills each student brings to school and acknowledges and welcomes students' identities into the classroom. Our students, their families, and communities are a great resource for expanding our ideas of what it means to do and know mathematics. These connections help students to begin to see themselves reflected in the math we do and value, both in and outside of the classroom. This quote from Rehumanizing Mathematics for Black, Indigenous, and Latinx Students underscores what it means to connect to students, their families, and communities. Students need to see themselves, their families, and people in their communities, as well as those from other communities, as doers of mathematics. In other words, mathematics class should provide students with mirrors for seeing themselves in the mathematics and windows for seeing the lives of others. Students see themselves, their families, and their communities in math when we find ways to use mathematics to connect with students, to get to know them and their families. When we encourage students to visualize mathematics contexts that connect to their lives and interests as they are making sense of the math. When we find opportunities to use mathematics to investigate community issues and issues of social justice. We also dearly want students to see images of people like themselves, who are affecting or who have affected the world through math in a variety of fields, like art, science, and sports. Here's a graph. I'd like for you to pause for a moment and take a closer look at this graph. This is an example of what Jenna Labe calls a slow reveal graph. Take a closer look. What do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you think this graph might be about? You may have noticed the names of different countries, the different bar sizes. You may be wondering why the Papua New Guinea bar is the longest. There's some new information now. What does this new information tell you? Well, this graph shows the number of different languages spoken in each country. Are you surprised? What does this representation make you wonder about? What else might you be interested in finding out? This is part of an example of an excursion available on the forum to create experiences that engage students in exploring communities and families. In this example, students learn about languages spoken in different parts of the world and then go on to study the languages present in their classrooms. After analyzing data about languages in the world, students can now connect this new information to their own families and communities. In an experience such as this one, students look at the languages they and others in their families and communities speak. For many teachers and students, this is an opportunity to recognize and celebrate our diverse competencies, apply mathematics to a variety of contexts, pursue mathematical questions that interest them, and generate their own data, and make connections to their families, their communities, and the world. We will continue exploring connections to students, families, communities with Dr. Julia Aguirre on January 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. Please join us for Mathematizing the World, building strong connections with students and their families and communities to learn mathematics in and out of school on January 28th from 7 to 8 p.m. Turn it back to you, Marta.
All right. So we began with this question, and we have shared the 4 areas that we've been considering as we strive on developing equitable classroom communities, where all students see themselves as capable doers of math. Our speaker series will afford us an opportunity to continue to investigate and expand our thinking with researchers and educators in the field. This last quote highlights the ideas and vision of our work. It is a quote that's embedded in our framework, and it states that when teachers and students and curriculum materials all deliberately focus on equity, then students can develop strong mathematical identities, and they can see themselves as agents of their own learning. And they can engage in deep and rigorous mathematics with intention, persistence, and joy. Thank you for allowing Lynn and I to share our stories and how those stories have influenced and continue to influence our work. And for engaging with us tonight as we shared the 4 categories in the framework and how they can support your work in building an equitable mathematics classroom. We will now turn it over to Karen for a brief Q&A.
Thank you, Lynne and Marta, for giving us an overview of these critical areas and an introduction to the topics that will be addressed in greater detail by our future speakers. One thing I'd like to add is that while these 4 areas are presented in an order, we don't see them as being hierarchical. In fact, as you've probably gathered throughout the session, while each area has their distinct features and specialties, there is a lot of overlap and interplay between and among the 4 areas that we've been describing. So a few questions have come into the chat, and we can spend a little time addressing some of those. And also, if as we're working through questions, you have questions, you can still submit them through the chat via the Q&A host feature. Okay, so this first question is, can you give an example of how schools can use the framework with teachers? I can begin with and answer that question, and Marta and Lynne, please jump in as well. We know from our experience of talking and working with schools and districts that schools are often using the framework as a shared reading experience for the entire school community of educators, and they begin as a shared reading and then have opportunities to discuss each area of the framework, but they also would select, as a group of educators, select one area that they feel either resonates with them as a school community or is an area that they want to work on more in their school to focus on throughout the school year. So we know that that's one way that people are using the framework. We also know that There are communities where coaches are using the framework with the teachers that they work with, asking teachers to select an area of the framework that they would like to focus on in their coaching work throughout the year, and then even focus in on just one or two specific questions in the framework. If you haven't seen the framework, it's available on the forum website, but the structure of the framework is each area is described, and then we give a set of guiding questions to think about in your work with students and with colleagues. And so coaches would ask a teacher to select one or two questions, just one or two questions to focus on for the year in their work. Marta, Lynne, do you have anything to add? I can go on to the next question, which is, can you make, it's related to the framework again, can you make a suggestion about how my school could begin this work, the work that's described in the framework? Marta, do you want to?
Yeah, I think one thing I might add is that on the forum site, we also have blogs, different blogs that have been written, and those correlate, many of them correlate with the framework, with the 4 categories, and they're very short, and they have vignettes of how teachers entered the work, and those are really short, engaging readings that sometimes can begin the work. So a team could read a blog, think about how the vignettes in the blog relate to their particular provocative questions they might have, and then connect that to one or more of the categories in the framework. So that's been something that I've seen schools use effectively.
Okay. Let's see, another question that came in actually to my chat is, can you speak to strategies that you've used to engage students who are reluctant or refuse to participate in math dialogue? Marta or Lynne, do you want to?
So one of the things we talked about today was thinking about students' assets and their strengths. And so thinking about for students who might be reluctant or, and that might be this question. I'm not sure if it's asking about students who don't want to share in the whole group or in the small group, but we do have some really amazing reflection tools, both student reflection tools and teacher reflection tools that are posted on the forum that can help you interview and also interview students and get students' own reflections about their experiences, so you can help inform you about what might be going on. But there's also really great teacher reflection tools that help you take evidence, like the one that Lynne shared, that can help you look to see when are students participating, do they participate more if there's a representation up, those kind of things. So trying to figure out ways in which those students can be their voices can be lifted up. And sometimes it's listening into small groups really intentionally and offering the ideas that students might share in a small group or with a partner to the whole class.
Lynne, do you want to add anything?
I would just say that what we can learn from students by asking them the question directly is invaluable. And so if students know that you really are interested in how they're experiencing math class, and those questions are in the tool for student reflection, that can really help us to gather that information, to help us to create those opportunities for students and make it more accessible and comfortable for students to share their thinking.
And I was also thinking about finding out why students might feel reluctant to share, asking them directly, or doing some things like rehearsing with them before they share, partnering with them to help them share, or asking them to, if there's a friend that they've worked with who they'd like to share with or could help share their ideas. Sometimes that can be a helpful stepping stone into supporting students who may not feel confident to share verbally in the whole group.
And I remember too in our teacher research group that helped us with the development of the tools that we're talking about. Several of the teachers used the question, do you think your ideas are valuable? Why or why not? And whose ideas do you think are valuable in the class? And that really gave them some such valuable information to see whether students were thinking that their ideas were even worthy of sharing, and if they weren't, why. It's a great question. Thank you.
Question. Here's a question from a math coach. Do you have any suggestions for how I can help my team shift towards taking a more strength-based approach when thinking about and talking about students?
That's one of the big questions, right, that we all grapple with. And so just going back to the section of the session from tonight about strengths-based assessment, and I think really working to change that, shift that practice of, instead of looking for what students can't do or aren't doing, that we're looking more closely at what is it they are doing, what is it their work is telling us, what is it their words are telling us. And so, again, I'm just going to go back to some of the things that we've said throughout the session, looking at the evidence and not just going on what I think or what I assume or what I thought, at the end of the day, but really using evidence to help inform what we learn and what we know about our students.
And also thinking about when we're looking at student work, let's say that we're thinking about, let's just say we're looking at student work with a team or listening in to students' ideas, that it's really important that the teachers, that the team have done the mathematics for themselves first, and that they understand, they look at that math broadly, right? First of all, that it's a task that's going to elicit lots of different students' competencies and solution paths, so that when we think about particular responses, that we've really broadened that for ourselves first. And in that way, we can really appreciate the variety of students' ideas and responses that'll come up in a task, rather than looking at it just with what was right or what was wrong, but rather what students brought to the work.
And one other thing I'd like to say about this is the importance of examining our own positions or our own beliefs about students. And so the teacher reflection tools really help us to get at examination of our own beliefs or our own stories, what we bring into the room and how we view our students. And that's an important piece that I feel that we know impacts how we see the students every single day.
Great. And I think we have time for one last question, and it's related to resources besides the framework. What are the other resources that you're referring to that are on the forum website? So
And
I can.
I was just going to say, I see somebody mention the excursions, because Lynne shared an example of an excursion. You can find those on the forum under classroom resources. Karen?
Oh, yeah, and I'll just say a little bit that on the forum, the tab of classroom resources, if there's a drop-down menu, you'll see excursions, and an excursion are actually curricular-based activities, a sequence of 4 to 6 related activities that really encourage students to apply the mathematics they're learning to the context of their own lives, the lives of others, and their communities. And so right now we have 6 excursions up on the website that you might want to check out for across the grades, K through 5. The excursions like the teacher reflection tool. There's one for whole class discussion and one for small group and pair work, and the student reflection tool are all freely downloadable. You just have to go to the site to find those resources. Okay, so we are just going to leave you with one final thought. Rusha, can we go back? Great, thanks. I just want to finish by thanking Lynne and Marta again for giving us an overview of the areas of the framework that we consider to be critical and important, and to provide us with an introduction to the topics that will be addressed in greater detail by our future speakers. We're very excited about this gathering of presenters who will share their expertise around the 4 elements that are critical to fostering and sustaining equity in the math classroom. And as Lynne and Marta shared, on December 12th, Susan Jo Russell and Deborah Shifter will join us for our second session titled Interweaving Deep Mathematics and Equitable Participation. And during their session, they will involve us in considering how engaging with complex math ideas can support equitable participation, and how giving attention to a wide range of student ideas deepens the mathematics. On behalf of the forum, thank you so much for joining us. If you've not already had a chance to do so, we hope you'll take a few minutes to explore the forum website and the resources that it has to offer. We look forward to seeing you again on December 12th at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time for our next presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.